suppose some of them must have travelled here with a trade mission and then escaped. I believe this is the only place they live in our country, much like those moths. Maomao offered a somewhat interested sound. Their colouring makes them look like cockroaches, but they are not, so do not worry. Maomao could have done without knowing that, she thought, rubbing her head vigorously with the handkerchief once again. The girl with the unfortunate choice of words delivered this lengthy lecture on insects for a full 30 minutes. If this continued, the sun would set before they finished. Maomao kept trying to end the conversation and leave, but each time she did, someone tugged on her sleeve. She was drawn back into the lesson again and again. She understood wanting to talk about something you were interested in. However, she wanted to let Shisui know how boring it was for her audience. If only they were talking about drugs, then she could survive this. The uncomfortable pause was soon interrupted by the sound of a wooden clapper. Maomao looked around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. She could see the other nearby palace women doing the same thing. The source was soon revealed from the gate to the south. A figure appeared, with a lady-in-waiting and a eunuch bodyguard on each side. 3 more people trailed behind her, and one of them was sounding the clapper. The centre of the parade was a woman dressed in colourful finery. Maomao thought she recognised her face, which looked composed and gentle. She believed that was the Empress Dowager. Maomao had only seen her once at the garden party the year before. However, not many people could move through the rear palace with such an extensive entourage. She compared the person before her to a hazy memory, and decided it must be the Empress Dowager. She seemed quite young to be the mother of the current emperor, who had such thick facial hair, but she continued forward as the clapper sounded. "I wonder where she is going," Shisui whispered. She was crouched in the shadows of a building. "Why are you hiding?" Maomao asked. "Well, aren't you?" Shisui had her there. In an almost conditioned reflex, Maomao likewise crouched behind a pillar. All the other palace women around were bowing deeply. Everyone had been taught from the moment they arrived that this is what one did when someone of higher status passed by. Technically, Maomao should have done this whenever Jinshi and his colleagues were present, but she had gotten into the habit of forgetting lately. That won't do, she thought. She had to maintain proper boundaries. Shaking her head, she resolved to do better in the future. Is she going in the direction of the clinic? Shisui mused, putting her chin in her hand and watching the Empress Dowager. It was certainly true that the clinic was in the direction the parade was going. The clinic, huh? Maomao wondered what the Empress Dowager would be doing going to the rear palace's unofficial medical office. Quite unexpectedly, Shisui provided the answer. "I heard that her ladyship started it. That was back when the Empress Regnant was at her most powerful. She couldn't do it publicly then, and it is still kept pretty quiet even now. That would certainly make sense." The Empress Dowager was known to be a kind-hearted woman. People said that her influence led to both slavery and the making of eunuchs being forbidden when the current emperor took the throne. Each of those changes would have been revolutionary on its own. Many people thought they were good choices considering basic human needs. However, there were troublesome consequences. The slave trade, for instance, had been a business. Removing it had stopped certain sectors from continuing. There was also the question of where to draw the line regarding what constituted slavery. It was clear enough when people were herded and sold like animals. But what about those who effectively made themselves collateral on a debt? Technically, they had entered into something like an employment contract. This could also be considered slavery. Considering all of this, even the courtesans who were perfectly legal at the moment could conceivably be considered slaves. Maomao remembered seeing the old madam discuss this possibility, and she had looked quite pale. In short, although outwardly there was no more slavery in the land, everyone was aware that the practice had simply changed its name and adapted to the new social standards in many ways. Maomao wasn't interested in finer details and didn't know much about them. "I think I'd better be getting back," Shisui said, grabbing her insect cage and standing up. "You should be careful, Maomao. You'll get in trouble if you slack off here for too long." "Yeah, I guess so." She wondered if the Empress Dowager's walk toward the clinic had something to do with the recent events at the Crystal Pavilion. If her ladyship was getting involved, there might soon be another revolution. This time it would be in medical treatment at the rear palace. Maomao wished she could be a fly on the wall. She was scared of what would happen if she was found eavesdropping. Also, Shisui was right. Maomao would really hear it from Hongyang if she was too late getting back. She crossed her arms and thought. It seemed the other ladies in waiting had been doing nothing but getting upset with her recently. I suppose I better get back, she said, and reluctantly headed for the Jade Pavilion. When Maomao returned, she was, quite unusually, made to do some actual cleaning. She was told to dust the windowsills with extra attention to detail. Her work only passed inspection on the third try. That was 2 failures. She began to wonder if Hongyang was getting her back for her recent attitude. But when she saw that the other ladies in waiting each had to redo their work at least once, she figured it must be something else. Someone must be coming, but who was it? They only cleaned this carefully when another consort was coming for a meal or a tea party. Meetings like these had been suspended not long ago. Only consorts whom they trusted completely were now received at the Jade Pavilion. Maomao was considering who might be included when the visitor arrived. It was the Empress Dowager herself. It has been too long, Lady Anshi, Consort Jayukayu said. She greeted her with a delicate smile and perfect posture. She was proving why she was the consort. All of her ladies in waiting except Hongyang seemed to wilt in her ladyship's presence. The Empress Dowager's gaze fell to Jayukayu's belly, but only for a second. That is how Maomao learned her ladyship's name was Anshi, though she knew she would almost certainly never speak it. So that is what is going on, Maomao thought. As Jayukayu's mother-in-law, the Empress Dowager shared an understanding with her. The fact that the deeply suspicious Jayukayu would not only receive the Empress Dowager, but also tell her about her pregnancy, showed how much she trusted her. Perhaps she needed to inform her ladyship. If you believed the rumors about the Empress Dowager, it seemed more likely she would. But Maomao had no way to be certain. She appeared very good-tempered as far as it went. Princess Lingli at first ignored her grandmother. She soon grew accustomed to the gentle Empress Dowager. Maomao tasted the food for poison. But before she could leave, the Empress Dowager said, "You dear, you are the attendant Jinchi sent, aren't you? How does she know that?" Maomao wondered, and why was this woman condescending when speaking to a mere food taster? Maomao wanted to ask, but she knew it might be rude, so she only said, "That's correct, ma'am," and bowed. Suhin told her. She said she had finally found a girl worth the effort, but that she was going back to the rear palace. Suhin was Jinchi's personal lady-in-waiting, a woman just entering old age. She had never seemed like the affable type, but apparently she was old friends with the Empress Dowager. "She was once my own lady-in-waiting, you know. That would explain it." It was common for the daughters of officials to serve as ladies-in-waiting or nursemaids. Then her ladyship glanced at Jayukayu. The perceptive consort appeared to take her meaning immediately. She said, "I am so very sorry, Lady Anshi, but might you excuse me for a moment to put the princess down for her nap?" Hongyang was holding Lingli, who looked tired from playing with her grandmother. She was mostly weaned now, but it served as a good excuse for Jayukayu to leave the room. Hongyang went with her mistress. This is how Maomao found herself in a room with the Empress Dowager. "She does know how to take a hint, doesn't she?" her ladyship said, sounding slightly amused. At that moment, she seemed less like Jayukayu's mother-in-law and more like her slightly older friend. Maomao wasn't sure what she was supposed to do, so she stood politely and watched the Empress Dowager for clues. Her ladyship noticed and gestured for Maomao to sit in a chair. She said, "It seems you have helped resolve a great many problems for us." She held a glass full of ice to cool her palms. The ice was a gift she had brought. Consort Jayukayu needed to keep her body from getting too cold. She could put the ice in her mouth and enjoy it as it melted. The princess had been devouring treats made of shaved ice with fruit juice on top. Maomao replied, "I have only offered what knowledge I have that happened to fit the situation." Maomao wasn't spectacularly imaginative. It just so happened that the truth sometimes lurked among the things she knew. These things were little more than a window into what her father had taught her. If they had asked him directly, she thought he would have solved their problems in half the time it took her. It would have been easy to see Maomao's words as contrary. The lady-in-waiting standing beside the Empress Dowager, a woman who was past 40 and exuded experience, was frowning. There were only 3 people in this room. Maomao wanted to start with a disclaimer, even if there might be a possible misunderstanding. She didn't want to seem like she was boasting about her abilities. She wanted the other woman to understand that clearly. Some might say she was selling herself short, but this was one of Maomao's tenets and she would live by it. The Empress Dowager said that is enough for my purposes. Her eyes went briefly to the ground. It seemed to Maomao she couldn't be sure that the kindness in them was replaced for an instant by something dull and vacant. Whatever you are able to do will be enough, but I want you to investigate something. The lady in waiting was watching the Empress Dowager, who slowly shook her head as she looked at Maomao. Do you suppose I have been cursed by the former emperor? It was quite a question for the Empress Dowager to ask. It was indeed a remarkable question. Chapter 14, His Former Majesty. The simple truth was that one rarely heard good things about the previous emperor. He was a foolish ruler, called a pathetic prince, and the puppet of the Empress Regnant. He was called many things, but in the rear palace he was known above all as a paedophile. This term was fitting, considering the Empress Dowager and the current emperor differed in age by only about 10 years. It was true that in this world, very young women were sometimes given as wives. These matches were sometimes political or intended to pay off a debt. But this was the rear palace, where many women of marriageable age existed. Yet the former emperor seemed to focus almost exclusively on the handful of younger girls. It proved he was a paedophile, a fact regardless of other opinions about him. The Empress Dowager had mentioned a curse, but Maomao wondered if believing in it truly helped her. Her ladyship had a scar on her belly from giving birth to the current emperor. Her body was still developing when she gave birth, and the birth canal was too small. They had no choice but to cut the child out. The man who had been made a eunuch to help with this procedure was Maomao's unfortunate old man. Perhaps the sacrifice had been worth it. The boy who would become the reigning monarch grew up spirited and strong. Despite the surgery, the Empress Dowager went on to bear another child, His Majesty's younger brother. At this point, however, Maomao had a thought. A terribly rude thought occurred to her, one that might get her slapped if she voiced it. Specifically, was the imperial younger brother truly the son of the prior emperor? Maomao understood the younger boy was a year older than she was. That meant the Empress Dowager would have been in her late 20s when he was born, not a young girl by any stretch of the imagination. Maomao did not care to pursue the matter. She felt that knowing anything about it would only make her life here harder. The Empress Dowager had said she would like to talk somewhere else if possible. Therefore, Maomao now found herself outside the rear palace. They remained within the inner court. This area was mainly where the emperor, his children, and the queen lived. Currently, upper consorts were in the rear palace. However, His Majesty did not have a proper spouse yet. Maomao could hardly be there alone, of course. Perhaps her ladyship had been planning this all along. She had arranged a tea party that would bring together all 4 of the upper consorts. It was quite a sight. Maomao had even spotted consort Lishu. She seemed nervous and shambled about like a clockwork doll. Maomao quietly prayed for the consort's good luck. What exactly do you think is going on here? Yinghua asked with a sigh. She wore an outfit that was nicer but not too much nicer than her usual clothes. Maomao had done the same. She and Yinghua were both present as ladies in waiting to consort Jiukayu. Hongniang, Giyuan and Ailan were also there. Jiukayu had left her most trustworthy eunuch bodyguards to look after the Jade Pavilion. Good question. The upper consorts had each been given a room. They had not gone very far, but a tea party was always a place where women competed for honor. Jiukayu was accompanied by 3 eunuchs, and they all had their hands full with the baggage. That seemed sufficient for her, but Lihua brought 5 eunuchs. Lulan brought even more, no fewer than 8, which was a dizzying number. Lishu was accompanied by just 4 baggage carriers. Her ladies-in-waiting seemed to find this arrangement quite disagreeable. The room Jiukayu received was pleasant. It was open to a cool breeze and stocked with juices and luscious fruits for dessert. Once Maomao had taken a bite and confirmed the food was safe, everyone began to eat. She had hardly imagined the Empress Dowager would do something as ridiculous as poison the snacks, but it was her job to check. Furthermore, it would have been rude not to eat what had been prepared for them, so Maomao dutifully ate a little more. The food was delicious, as one might expect from their hostess. Juicy grapes snapped delightfully in their mouths. Perhaps they had been cooled with well water. Since there was still time before the tea party began, consort Gyukayu instructed her ladies to relax. The consort used the opportunity to doze a little. Tiredness was common in the first stage of pregnancy. However, with Gyukayu it seemed to be going on longer than usual. She slept sitting up so as not to disturb her hair. A rounded cushion was placed on the chair for her comfort. A pillow stuffed with cotton was set at her neck. Hongyang had water ready to wake her and tools to touch up her makeup. Fortunately for everyone, the princess was sleeping soundly with her mother. The point of Yinghua's question seemed to be that it was strange the Empress Dowager would invite Gyukayu to a tea party knowing she was pregnant. I know she will probably try to be considerate, but still Gyukayu's pregnancy was now an open secret, but actually having to sit there and drink tea with the others might invite some uncomfortable questions. Consort Lihua probably won't be an issue, and I guess we do not have to worry about Consort Lishu either, Maomao thought. Lihua and Gyukayu had avoided antagonizing each other largely by avoiding each other. Lihua was too proud and dignified to humiliate someone else. Gyukayu was wise enough to know that fighting with Lihua, whose blood was more noble than her own, was not a good idea. Maomao also strongly suspected that Lihua herself was pregnant. The consort did not want to talk too much about Gyukayu's pregnancy. She worried it might draw attention to her own situation. As for Lishu, she could barely speak even in front of Gyukayu. It was unlikely she would be a problem now. If anyone in her party was likely to cause trouble, it would be her ladies-in-waiting. However, only each consort's chief lady-in-waiting was to attend. Lishu's her former food taster, who had since been promoted, would probably keep her mouth shut. That left only Lulan, who was still an unknown quantity. And there was the Empress Dowager herself, whose motivations for calling this gathering remained mysterious. There weren't any particularly interesting rumors about Lulan, other than people talking about how gaudy her outfits were. Even Lishu had at least one good story going around. It claimed that she had once collapsed with a spontaneous nosebleed while reading a book. When she had heard about it, Maomao had only hoped that nobody would ask too many questions about what kind of book it had been. Maomao, Hongyang called. Yes, ma'am. Do not worry about doing the food tasting for the snacks at the tea party today. I will handle it. You understand what I'm saying, right? Yes, ma'am. It was imperative that they not imply they even thought there might be poison in the food served by the former queen. Bringing a formal food taster would send the wrong message. However, that left the very real question of where responsibility would fall if there really was something in the food. As a compromise, the chief ladies-in-waiting were to be served the same things as the consorts. It could hardly have been more annoying and roundabout if they had tried. Hongyang was looking straight at Maomao, a slight frown on her face. She said meanwhile the Empress Dowager herself wants to borrow you for something. Then she asked, do they want your help with some kind of problem again? Maomao did not say anything for a moment, unsure whether she could or should do so. Her silence appeared to be answer enough for Hongyang. Hongyang said it doesn't matter. I suppose you could not tell me anyway. However, Hongyang strode up to Maomao. Maomao involuntarily backed away until she was pinned against the wall. Kindly do not do anything to betray Lady Gyukayu. I wouldn't dream of making an enemy of you, Lady Hongyang. Good enough, she said. She backed away again with an uncommonly gentle smile on her face. I truly want to stay on good terms with you, Maomao. Yes, of course. Hongyang was perfectly ready to attend consort Gyukayu, Maomao thought. The other three girls might be a little flighty. However, so long as the chief lady-in-waiting was here, all would be well. She had just seen that firsthand. If you would have come with me, please. The woman who seemed to summon Maomao was the same middle-aged lady-in-waiting who had been with the Empress Dowager on her visit to the Jade Pavilion. Maomao followed her through a covered walkway until 6 pavilions came into view. Distinct wings extended from the main building. The placement of their windows and pillars showed they were carefully designed. This served as the rear palace before the rear palace we know today was built, the middle-aged woman said, as if she knew what Maomao was thinking. I see, ma'am. So the 6 pavilions must have been the consort's quarters. The wings were where the other palace women lived. They walked in silence after that, passing between the pavilions toward a wing at the center. The area seemed unoccupied, but the place looked clean. Maomao ran a finger along one of the windowsills and found not a speck of dust. The building faced the central courtyard. The gravel in the dry landscape garden showed signs of having been raked recently. Maomao thought she saw the lady-in-waiting glance venomously at it. This is it. They arrived at a room that was slightly larger than the others, and it was in the center of the structure. The lady-in-waiting slowly opened the door. The moment she did so, a distinctive odor reached Maomao's nose. She frowned instinctively, then peeked into the chamber. A strange air filled the tidy space. The cover on the bed was still pulled back, almost sliding off. A collection of brushes sat on the table, though some had fallen to the floor.